Hello. It's 10 o'clock. So everybody can please find their seat for us. We'll get started. So I had one quick announcement that I forgot to make earlier today or this morning. So Katie Bosenko with the Arkansas Children's Hospital, she is leading the clinical registry. She's back there with the really cute squishy baby. Hi. She is here today only, but she is available to talk about the clinical registry, to enroll you if you're not already enrolled, or answer any questions. So I encourage you to stop by and talk with her. But now I'm going to pass it over for our first presentation from Emily Holl of the Sibling Support Project. I'm really excited that she's here today. She's going to talk about 7 simple strategies for sibling support. So thank you, Emily.
Thank you. All right. Can everyone hear me? Yes. All right. I'm so excited that I see a lot of siblings who are still here in the audience, so that makes me really happy. I want to thank Allison and everyone at the SATB2 Gene Foundation for creating the space for siblings to shine. I'm very excited about being here, and just by a show of applause, like, how excited are you guys to all be together? Right? It's incredible. Is this my little clicker? Yes? All right. It's the big green button, isn't it? All right. So welcome. I would love to start by just telling you a little bit about the Sibling Support Project. I am the lucky person who gets to be the director of the Sibling Support Project right outside of Seattle, Washington. We are the first national program in the United States dedicated entirely to supporting siblings of people with developmental health and mental health concerns. We started our work actually in 1982 with the creation of the very first SIB shop. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about SIB shops. And we became an organization in 1990, and we have continued to grow ever since. We are a proud program of Kindering, which is Washington State's largest neurodevelopmental center. And we are really thrilled that our work has reached not only a national audience here in the US, but an international audience. We have SIB shops all across the United States and in about 20 countries around the world. So we do our work with siblings in a few different ways. First of all, through education and media. We have a lot of books that are written not only for siblings, but by siblings of all ages. One of my favorites you see up there on the screen is Views from Our Shoes, which is a book that is a collection of essays written by children as young as 5. Who have brothers and sisters with health concerns or disabilities. So thank you. Yeah, I'm really proud of the fact that so many of our books are written by siblings. We also talk to the media every chance we can get to promote awareness of siblings and sibling issues. And we're going to talk today about why before we dig into the how. We're going to talk about why it's so important to support siblings. And as I'm talking today, I want to make sure that we have a lot of time to interact, and I would love to answer your questions, especially you siblings, all of you brothers and sisters. Actually, if you are a sibling, could you stand up for just 1 second? Like this morning? Oh, yeah, I love it. I hope that you all are going to join me this afternoon for our SIB shop, but is there anyone of those siblings, is there anyone who does not like to have fun? Anyone who does not like to have fun? Oh, Caden's he's a little bit on the fence about that one. Okay, if you do not like to have fun, you're going to have to find something else to do between the hours of 1 and 4:30, because we're going to have a ton of fun in our SIB shop. SIB shops are really, I think, the best and most fun part of what we do at the Sibling Support Project. We'll be talking about those today. We also offer workshops, future planning workshops. We travel around and do conferences like this one to really help people understand the amazing opportunities and concerns that siblings experience. Then finally, I want to tell you about our online support groups for siblings. We have 3 groups for siblings of all different ages. They currently live on Facebook. They're closed Facebook groups. And if you are a sibling, some of you sibs are still a little bit young for these groups. But if you know of siblings, please tell them about these groups. They are an amazing way for siblings to connect to each other 24/7 to share information and support. We have SibNet for our adult sibs that has been around as long as the internet. It started as a listserv. I will date myself and tell you I was on the listserv, okay? I am also a sibling in addition to being the director of the Sibling Support Project. SibTeen is our group for teens. Like so much connection and support from these teens who, anyone, if you remember adolescence, kind of can be a bumpy road, can't it? Yeah. So our SibTeens are in there supporting each other. And then Sib20 is our group for siblings in their 20s. So I encourage you to check out those groups if you're interested. Oops. And then Sib Shops, they are the heart and soul of what we do. When Don Meyer, our founder, was first thinking about sibling support back in the late 1970s, what he sort of read about in the literature and the research for sibling support models could best be described as a little circle of folding chairs with little siblings in them, with a therapist and a box of tissues. And that didn't really speak to the 11-year-old in Don, right? He was a special education teacher, and he thought, well, that's not something that I would like to give up a perfectly lovely Saturday afternoon to attend. So he wanted to create a sibling support model that really centered around fun. And like I said, for those of you who are coming to the Sib Shop this afternoon, if you don't like to have fun, just, maybe take a stroll, do something different, because fun is a really, really key ingredient to our Sib Shops. Sib Shops are also spaces where siblings can go to receive information and support, right? And we're going to talk about why those things are so important. I want to show you a little video now. I want to introduce you to one of our super sibs and also give you a little glimpse of what a Sib Shop looks like and what kind of impact it can have.
My sister is the most lovey, sweet person I know. The laughter from her makes everybody else start laughing. It's good to get that just happiness. My sister is named Elin Magnuson. She is 9 years old, and she has a 1q44 chromosomal deletion. She cannot talk. She cannot walk. I always know that her needs usually are way more serious than mine. I know that I would always want her to have the best experience possible.
Is that fine?
If anyone ever says anything about her that is not positive, I felt kind of like jumping on them. But then I realized not everyone understands.
Anya is really fierce when it comes to advocating for Elin. And I know Elin actually is pretty vocal in times when she's trying to stick up for Anya as well. They can sense each other's feelings just via body language. It's pretty magical. Yeah. A lot of the times, Anya's life was in flux.
Every time we would have to go to the hospital, our whole lives got uprooted. We would have to figure out, okay, how's Anya gonna get to soccer practice? How's Anya gonna get to school? All those day-to-day things that when you're at the hospital with your kid, you've got 10,000 things happening. But then you have another child who's also very concerned about her sister. That was the hardest part, is kind of juggling what to do with Anya when Elin was in the hospital.
If you're struggling at a time of stress, you know that your parents already have a lot on their plate and they're already dealing with a lot. And you don't want to add anything, but you also don't want to feel so alone.
When we originally found out about Elin's disability and what kind of detriment that can have on the siblings with a sibling with disabilities, we did not want that to be part of our family's kind of dynamic.
When she went to Sib Shops, she was with all of her peers that had very similar situations to her.
At the Sibling Support Project, we believe that every sibling deserves to have access to information and support that empower them to care not only for their families, but also for themselves. The first time I had really the privilege of co-facilitating a sib shop, I thought back to my own childhood and thought about how lucky I would have been to have had the opportunity to meet other brothers and sisters of kids with disabilities. Growing up, I never knew a single other person who had a brother or a sister with a disability, and that can be a really isolating feeling.
For her to have a community where she felt heard made me feel really good that we had a place to send her that could give her that support that's not just from us.
It's almost like she can breathe a little bit deeper. It just opens this door of like, wow, there's other people out there that are like me, that struggle with the same things, but we still have the highs and lows like typical kids.
It's kind of a relief, honestly, to not have to explain in deep detail what my life is like, where everybody has similar struggles to you. Coming to Sib Shops has helped me realize that I'm not alone. You just can kind of let go, and everyone understands you.
For Anya, making her flourish in her own environment, not just between her relationship with her sister, but seeing typical kids when they're going through certain struggles, it allows her to see that she has more compassion for everyone else in her own community.
Siblings need opportunities to voice their own concerns, their hopes, their dreams for their future and their siblings' future.
I was concerned in the beginning because Elin was different and I wasn't sure that they would be able to have that sort of close sister thing, but they definitely do. It's been really wonderful to see them become closer and to see Elin really reach towards her sister as a companion and a peer.
Even though she can't talk, like, she can physically lean on me, cuddle me, and just give love.
Elin says very few words that most people can understand, but one of the words she says very clearly is Anya. So that tells you a lot about kind of how Elin feels about her bigger sister. So many people will just say, you know, how do you do it? You know, and it's just like, well, how do you not do it? Everybody has their own battles, and you just have to, you make it through one day at a time. My hopes for Anya are that she continues to be a fierce advocate for her sister.
Everyone is going through something at some time, and it's important that you're there for them. Even if you don't completely understand it, you make them feel like you are there. Behind the mask, there's probably a lot of things going on and emotions and feelings that need to be expressed in a safe place. In those tough moments, everyone at Sib Shops has really been there for me.
All right, well Anya's like my hero. She's such a wise little soul, and I think she is such a great representative of so many amazing siblings out there. I'd like to, as I said earlier, kind of launch into our discussion by first talking about why it's important to support siblings. And I think you saw in that video a lot of good reasons why. But let's talk about what we know from the research. And I started to say earlier, I got so excited about our Sib Shop this afternoon, I got derailed. But if you have questions, I want to have like I want to have ample time for us to talk and for you guys to ask questions, including you siblings. If you kids have questions about being a sibling or other siblings or anything, let's do a Q&A after I kind of go through my slides, okay? And if you guys have questions but you don't really want to like raise your hand and ask them, there are some note cards on your table. There are white note cards for the parents if you have questions, and for the siblings, there are note cards of different colors. So that way we'll know who asked the question, if it was a parent or a sibling, without necessarily knowing exactly who that person was, right? So you can kind of ask your question anonymously. And I believe our amazing volunteers, Hannah and Noah, are going to collect those cards for us. after we finish with the slides and when we launch into our discussion. But also, of course, feel free to just raise your hand and let's chat, okay? This is a topic that doesn't get a lot of attention, and so it's amazing that we are here today to really explore it. So why is it important to support siblings? Well, the first thing that we know from the research and the clinical literature is that siblings' experiences really do parallel parent experiences. And just about anything that we can say about being the parent of a child with a disability or a health concern, we can put ditto marks on for siblings, okay? Siblings experience many, if not most, of the same issues as parents, as well as some unique experiences of their own that we will also talk about. The second thing is that sibling issues are lifespan issues. Think about it. These brothers and sisters are going to be in the lives of the person with the diagnosis longer than anyone, right? Certainly longer than any provider. We love our providers, we appreciate our providers, and probably longer even than parents in many cases. Okay, this is a relationship that can easily exceed 65, 70, 75 years, which is a long time. So sibling issues are lifespan issues. Siblings who are preschoolers will have some unique concerns. Siblings who are senior citizens will have some unique concerns. And those concerns will evolve and change over the course of the lifespan of the individual and the family. Okay. The third reason it's important to support siblings is that siblings spend quantity time. What do I mean by quantity time, right? Well, if we look over the course of the lifespan, what is true of all siblings, of people with and without diagnoses and disabilities, right? Siblings in general have a high level of contact with each other, right? A lot of frequent contact, especially when we're young. Think about it, we're living under the same roof probably, maybe going to the same school, we're part of the same community. And then again, toward the later stages in life, right? We come back together. What happens in the middle is that we tend to go off and live our lives, right? Maybe we go away to college, maybe we move to another city to take a job, maybe we start a family of our own. So those levels of involvement may decrease kind of towards middle age, but we find that again, towards the later stages of life, siblings sort of come back together, maybe to care for aging parents or maybe help each other with their own health concerns. The fourth reason it's important to support siblings is that siblings spend quality time. We talked about quantity time, but quality time. And by that, I mean, I'm a big fan of inclusion and inclusive classrooms. Need your thumbs up. But no classmate in an inclusive classroom will have as great an impact on the development, particularly social development, of a child with a disability or a health diagnosis as his or her brothers and sisters, right? These are 24/7 social models, aren't they? And then finally, the fifth reason it's so important to support siblings is that siblings really are the next generation of caregivers. This is something that government is starting to recognize, service providers are starting to recognize, and boy, our families are feeling it too, right? We are recognizing that as parents age, something none of us like to think about, and become less and less able to care for their now probably adult child, it's really siblings who usually step in to provide support. So these 5 reasons, I hope you guys agree, I think these are pretty compelling reasons as to why we should be thinking about siblings at every turn, right? And this is why I spend a lot of my time traveling around or Zooming around and talking, quite frankly, to pretty much anyone who will listen to me about why it's so important to support siblings. Okay, so let's dig into the how, okay? I'm going to give you 7 simple strategies for sibling support, as I talked about. And the thing that I hope that you take away from these 7 strategies is that they really are pretty simple, okay? We are all busy parents, grandparents, family supporters. If anyone feels that they have enough time in the day, talk to me afterwards. I want to know your secret. So these are really simple strategies that are designed to kind of just fit into your life, your family life, right? So the first strategy is to provide siblings with age-appropriate information. So I want to ask you guys, and I just want you to just yell it all out. Where do parents receive information about their child's diagnosis? Say it louder. The internet or the doctors. Usually someone says Google first, and I'm like, yes, but just, okay, doctors. We'll start with doctors, yes. Where else do parents get information from? Other parents, right? Parent groups. Therapists, thank you. Where else? Google. I knew somebody would say Google. Beware of Dr. Google. Okay, we love Google, but what do we do without Google? But yes, Dr. Google. But you guys, you get it, right? Doctors, clinicians, therapists, social workers. Where do siblings get information about their brother or sister's diagnosis? Yeah, if they're lucky, their parents, right? If they're really lucky, then clinicians. Right? They have access to clinicians and doctors. And Google, there's Google again. We can't escape it. I love Google, don't get me wrong. Google's gonna like descend upon us with one of their drones, right? Don't say bad things about us. But yeah, siblings rely largely on parents to share information. And we know from the research that this is one of the biggest ways that the sibling experience parallels the parent experience, is the need for information about the diagnosis. Because guess what? In your families, this is a diagnosis that is not experienced by just one person, is it? And it's not just experienced by the child with the diagnosis and the parents, right? Everyone in the family has their own experience of this diagnosis, including siblings. And not talking about it often creates more confusion and more challenges. And I will tell you, it is for the best and most loving reasons that most parents don't share information, right? You don't want to confuse your other kiddo, especially if the road to a diagnosis is long and bumpy. We were just talking about that, right? That the road to the diagnosis can be really long and bumpy. My brother wasn't diagnosed until he was in his 30s, okay? We grew up in the 70s when there just wasn't a lot of information available. And so parents don't want to confuse their other children. They don't want to burden them or worry them or upset them. But guess what? It's like the elephant in the room, right? This is a reality that we're all living. So how do we provide siblings with information? Well, we talk to kids, we talk to a lot of siblings, and we ask them, how do you want to learn information about your brother or sister's diagnosis? And what they told us was largely that they do not want a big, solemn, sit-down, birds and bees kind of talk, right? They want ongoing, fluid conversations, questions, maybe on the way to soccer practice. Hey, if someone asked about your sibling's diagnosis lately, what are you telling them? And if the kiddo is pretty accurate and they have the words that make sense to them, you can pat them on the shoulder, send them off to soccer practice. And if it needs a little tweaking, that's okay too, right? So age-appropriate information is so important from parents, but not just parents, from providers too. We encourage parents to go to providers and say, hey, by the way, right, Josh is coming for therapy next week, and his little sister Sarah, well, she has some questions. She's got some questions about his diagnosis and what kinds of things you do in therapy. She doesn't know. Would you spend 10 minutes with her at the end of the session to just kind of answer any questions she might have? The bad news is a lot of providers don't really feel like this is part of their job description. Naturally, they just don't kind of think of it. The good news is we have yet to meet one who refuses to do this. In fact, most providers say, oh yeah, of course Sarah has questions. Yeah, I'd be happy to spend 10 minutes with her, not only next week, but anytime she has other questions, right? So direct access to providers is so great. Right? You know, when a child hears something, when you try to tell your own kids something, it goes in one ear, out the other, right? Sometimes, right? I know my kids do that. But if another adult tells them the exact same thing, whew, it's like the greatest thing since sliced bread, isn't it, right? Because it's just not the parent, right? It's another adult that has a little more cred, right? So age-appropriate information in language that kids can understand. And parents often have a lot of questions about this one. So hold those questions. Bring it on. Okay, strategy number 2, super important, to provide siblings with opportunities to meet other siblings. Of course, I will tell you that I think sib shops are a great way to do that, right? And when you go home to your communities, you can look for a sib shop in your local community, or I'm hoping that Allison and I are going to keep talking, and we're going to find ways for SATB2 to provide SIB shops, maybe more often than just at this conference, right? We're going to work together to hopefully make that happen. But SIB shops aren't the only way, okay? Conferences like this, we're going to have a really good time today, and you siblings are going to get a lot of other chances to hang out with each other, right? These could be friendships that grow over the years. Some of my closest friends in the world are siblings. Okay, so conferences like this, if you have a local provider or you belong to a local organization in your community and they do things like maybe fundraisers or family gatherings or holiday parties, why not carve out time for siblings to get together during those events and initiatives? Okay, maybe it's a buddy walk, you have a sibling team, so fun. And then also parents, if you're coordinating play dates for your child who has the diagnosis, why not see if there are other siblings, right? Why not see if the siblings can tag along and maybe meet one another? So there are a lot of ways for siblings to meet each other. As I said in the video, growing up, I didn't know a single other sibling, and that can be a really lonely, lonely place to hang out a lot of the time, okay? Strategy number 3, who can guess what this one's about? It's about communication, okay? Encourage good communication with typically developing children. Well, what on earth does that look like? What does good communication look like? Well, around here, the Sibling Support Project, we really, really believe in the tenets of active listening. Excuse me. And for those of you who don't know what active listening is, first of all, there's a really great book which is a crash course in active listening, which is so helpful as a parent and just in your life in general. It's called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. Okay, it's a book that's been around for decades. It's a really easy read. It has little cartoons in it, but it is a crash course in active listening. And the basic idea, I'm going to give you like even a shorter crash course in active listening. You know, the idea behind active listening is that we are really present when we are hearing from our kids. We are acknowledging what they say through verbal cues. Oh, I see. Tell me more about that. Really? That really happened? Tell me more about that. Verbal cues and also nonverbal cues. You're making eye contact. You're nodding, right? If you're talking to a little, maybe you're getting down to their eye level so that they know you're really present, okay? Active listening is not, and I repeat not, finding solutions for our kids, right? I will tell you, from working with siblings for so many years, siblings have a lot of wisdom. Most kids have a lot of wisdom. They just need the opportunity to bring that out. So if a kiddo is talking with you about a challenge at school, you're basically hearing them and validating them. And if you guys don't remember a thing I say today, besides how much fun we're going to have in the afternoon with our kids, I want you to remember this. Siblings want to be heard and validated, right? And that validation takes place when we validate the good things that happen in our lives as siblings and also the not so good things, right? The challenges too, right? Because what's worse than feeling not so great about something, but then feeling also wrong for it, right? Siblings who tell us that their parents provided amazing support tell us that one of the best things they did was to just acknowledge and validate. Gosh, you know what? When your sister does things like that in public, I get embarrassed too. That's validation. That's honesty, okay? One of the best things that my mom ever said to me during one of my adolescent meltdowns, which I think most of us have, but a meltdown involving my brother, as I was crying and screaming and saying, "It's just not fair. It's just not fair." She said, "You know what, Emily, you're right. It's not fair. The world is not always a fair place." And that was really what I needed to hear, right? She validated what I was feeling. So good communication is about active listening and validation, okay? Strategy number 4, this is usually the point at which some parent wants to throw something at me because Encourage parents to set aside special time with sibs. Well, again, remember before I said, does anyone here feel like they have enough time in the day? Not a single hand. That's kind of what I figured. We're all, oh, Alice, I know you don't have enough time in the day, Allison. Well, that's because you don't sleep probably, right? Who needs to sleep? So we're all super busy, and we're especially busy as parents of kids who have some different needs, right? The good news here is that with siblings, a little goes a really long way, all right? So carve out some special time. What could that be? I'll tell you another personal story. Growing up for me, it was every Friday for 15 minutes in the car with my mom on the way to pick up dinner, takeout, and it was 15 minutes on the way home with my mom after we picked up dinner. And during that 30 minutes, it was my favorite 30 minutes of every week. We could talk about what was happening at school or what was going on with my brother, or we would just listen to the radio. That's what we used to do back in the day. We used to listen to the radio in the car before we had all the technology. Or maybe we just didn't say anything at all, but it was my special time with my mom. Other siblings have said, you know what? Growing up, my parents let me stay up 20 extra minutes after they put my brother to bed. And it was just our time. 20 minutes a day. We could do a puzzle or maybe watch part of a show or talk. Didn't really matter. It was just our special time, 20 minutes a day. Another sibling recently said, we did a panel, another sibling, she said, actually, my mom used to take me along when she brought my brother to therapy, and we would sit in the car for that 50 minutes and listen to a podcast or talk or whatever, right? So it's carving out these little moments. Child development experts will tell you that the way to show a child that you care, to create that security, that stability, that strong connection, it's not these big sweeping gestures, right? Although I can't think of a child who would turn down a trip to Disney, for example, right? But it's these small, consistent gestures. It's the 20 minutes a night after the sibling goes to bed, right? So think about that, and if you have access to respite services in your community, it's always too few and far between, but if you have access to respite, think about it. It can be really, really good. Okay, strategy number 5. Learn more about life as a sibling. So we're all doing that here today, and I so appreciate that you are taking the time to learn more about life as a sibling. But there are so many great books and movies and films and documentaries out there. You can go to our website, siblingsupport.org, and find some of them. So learn more about the experiences of siblings, right? We also have a paper on our website that you can download at no cost called What Siblings Would Like Parents and Service Providers to Know, right? These are nuggets of wisdom collected by siblings. Strategy number 6. Encourage parents to reassure their children by making plans for the future. So the future is something that is exciting, right? Hopefully. Can also be scary. Can also be really unknown. So one of the things that many, many siblings think about at different stages of their lives in different ways is the future care of their brother or sister. Okay? Children as young as 5 are thinking about this. Certainly by the time they're teenagers, if you go to our Sib teen group that I mentioned earlier, you see teenagers saying, I am getting ready to go off to college, I'm so excited, but I need to find a major that's going to enable me to make enough money so that I can support my family and my sibling. Or, I want to go away to college, but I can't go too far because I need to kind of stick around so I can help out, right? So we encourage parents to talk with your kids about the future at every turn, and we encourage you to start young, right? At every IEP meeting, we take the semi-radical stance of saying, you know what? Why not invite, do not obligate, but why not invite the sibling to participate in the IEP meeting? Maybe if they can't attend, maybe we have a conversation and ask the sibling, well, what do you think it's important for the teachers to know about your brother? Siblings have a lot of wisdom, right? Siblings know their brothers and sisters in ways that parents sometimes don't, okay? So we encourage siblings to be part of those conversations about the future and every transition point, so IEP meetings. right? After high school, what's going to happen? Right? Every transition point, so that when we start to talk about the future and the future care of the person with the diagnosis, the future is not this big, scary, ominous thing that we've never talked about, right? And I will tell you, a few slides ago, we talked about the fact that siblings are the next generation of caregivers. We are. One way or the other, that's pretty much how it's going to work out, right? And I will assure you that siblings step more willingly and more ably into that role if they have information along the way and if they have a voice and choices along the way, right? So there aren't these assumptions about what the sibling will or will not do, but the sibling is able to say, these are the things I really want to take on, and these are the things I'm not so sure about, right? And I think one of the reasons that we shy away from those conversations about the future, in addition to the fact that who wants to talk about a time when I'm no longer here? Like, that's not my idea of a fun conversation, right? But it's so important for us, especially in our families. But the other reason is that, we feel like, well, once we make this future plan, it's locked in stone and we're bound to it forever. But what we try to talk with families about is the fact that future planning is a fluid and flexible process, right? It changes as our needs change, as our lives change. Let's think about 2020. We all had plans for 2020, didn't we? And then look what happened, right? A global pandemic hit, and what happened to our plans? And we adapted, right? And we moved on. If I know any families who know about being flexible and adapting to the circumstances, it's you guys, right? You're resilient. And so I encourage you to think about starting those conversations about the future. So that, if your child says to you, Mom, Dad, when I grow up, I want my brother Peter to live with me. I'm ready to take that on. We want you parents to feel really empowered to say, you know what, Emily, if that's what you want later, and if that's what Peter wants later, then we'll support that 100%. But if that's not what you want, and if that's not what Peter wants, there's going to be other options, and we want you to know what those are going to be, and we want you to talk with us about what those options can be and how you'd like to be involved. Strategy number 7, the very last one, remember, the single strongest factor affecting a sibling's interpretation of disability or diagnosis is, you guessed it, the parent's interpretation of that diagnosis. So if we parents decide, gosh, this diagnosis is just the biggest tragedy to befall our family, chances are pretty good the siblings are going to feel the same way. But if we instead say, you know what, we are going to manage this and greet it with as much grace and humor as possible, we have every reason to believe that siblings will follow suit, right? We set that tone in our families. So those are my 7 strategies. Hopefully you find them simple, but I'm also hoping that we have some opportunities to really talk, to have questions from our young siblings, from our parents, from our grandparents, so that we can really apply some of these things to your real lives. That's why we're all here, right? There's our website, and that's the end of my slides. So if anyone has any questions, I would love to take them. And I don't know, Noah and Hannah, do we have any cards? If you have a card at your table, we might not have any cards, but raise your hand if you have a card filled out with a question.
And if you prefer, you can come up and ask your question here. I've got a question. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you for asking a question.
Are there different approaches for siblings that are younger versus older than the special needs child?
Yeah, it's a great question. And one of the reasons that we start so young with SIB shops is that we find that a lot of the issues really kind of start in childhood and sort of continue on throughout different ages. So I'll give you a really concrete example. So many siblings feel and talk about this idea of a little bit of resentment because the child with the diagnosis gets so much time and attention, right? Parental time and attention. And in one part of our brains, we acknowledge like that's just how it needs to be, and we love our brothers and sisters. But then there's a very real other part of us, especially when we're kids, that like want their mom and dad, right? That want that attention too. And so that issue of resentment can really carry through in different ways from a child's perspective. As we get a little bit more mature, maybe we are a teenager, maybe we're kind of forming our own identity and moving away from our family of origin. Our peer group is way more important, right? But we're still kind of, we're still trying on our independence, right? And so sibling issues of resentment that they're not getting the parental time and attention can kind of manifest in different ways for different teenagers, right? Either by rebelling or by being the good kid, don't want to add any other pressure or problems, right, to my parents' situation. Into adulthood, you know, we have siblings. I was just reading the other night, we have siblings in our Sib 20 group who are saying, I'm getting married, it's wedding season, right? I'm getting married, I just want one day to be about me. Just one day to be about me. And so many of the wedding plans and the decisions that we make are based around my sibling. So that can, you know, the resentment, that's just one example. There are other issues like guilt. I mean, we could do we would need a whole conference on guilt, okay? Like, I'm sure everybody would sign up for that one, right? But, you know, it's these same sort of themes that sort of weave throughout our lives and impact in different ways. So yeah, which is why we like to get them young. So in Sib Shops, we like to create a space where siblings can come and play and be free and be kids and have fun, but also to talk about those feelings that might not be so great and really be validated and be able to kind of move on from that, right? So that they kind of learn how to acknowledge, validate their own feelings, and move forward. So yeah, thanks for asking that question. Any other questions? Hi, Rachel.
Hi, so I'm actually a sibling as well as a parent.
Oh.
I have an older brother who has a completely different, unrelated genetic disorder, and I grew up in this world. Little did I know I'd have a child of my own, that I would be thrown in this caretaking world. And I feel like this is an awesome program, and I totally could have used this like as a kid, and I think it's really interesting.
Great, thank you. And it's so interesting, Rachel, that you wear those two different hats as a sibling and a parent. I'm sure that your sibling experience has prepared you in many ways for your parent experience.
Yeah, definitely. And like a lot of the stuff you said, like my parents didn't really talk to me about stuff, and like I didn't want to move away to college because I wasn't ready, and I didn't do a lot of things that I could have because I was always like, oh, but Ethan.
Right.
And I honestly held myself back a little bit, and then once I moved out, I was like, oh, okay, life is pretty cool. I can figure out who I am. And then I had a kid.
Yes,
And
yes.
I actually moved back with my parents, so now I have my son and my brother in the same house, and you have a 31-year-old and an almost 4-year-old competing for attention, and it's quite interesting.
Yes, well, I hope you will be at our Sib Shop this afternoon.
It's really cool. Thank you for all this.
Yes.
It's really awesome.
Thank you for your comment, Rachel.
Do we have any cards?
We love sidekicks.
Emily. I'm monitoring the virtual login, and we had a question, which is also a question I have, about how people can learn more about where regional Sib shops exist and are set up, and potentially help you in our own communities.
Great. Thank you so much for that question from our virtual audience. And thank you, virtual audience, for being here. I wish you were here in the room with us, but you're here with us in spirit. So if you go to our website, siblingsupport.org, you can find a directory of registered Sib shops under the panel. Oh, someone is doing it on their phone right now. And you can search by city, and it'll pop up, a little map will pop up, and you need to kind of maneuver a little bit to find the closest one, because it'll automatically pick like a 35-mile radius. So if there's not something within 35 miles, you're going to have to kind of zoom out and move around. So we have that directory of online Sib shops. But we need so many more Sib shops. We have probably close to 500 in the world, but it's not nearly enough. And so part of my work is ensuring that people not only know about Sib shops, but encourage professionals and parents to maybe start a sib shop in their own community. And we have an online training for that. We have in-person trainings for that. And I'm happy to talk to anyone who's interested. I will be talking with Allison more about maybe setting something up for you guys to ensure that you have more sib shops. I think it would be so cool to have a SATB2 sib shop that meets virtually with siblings like from around the world, periodically, once a month, once a quarter. I don't know, whatever you all decide, but I think that would be so special because what a great way to connect. So thanks for that question from our virtual audience.
Hello.
Hi.
I want to ask a spinoff of Bill's question, or I think it's a spinoff. So we have, Noah is the oldest child in our family, and so he's the older sibling to our 3 others, but really he's not.
Right.
Really they are. And so is there any weird dynamics or things like talking about that? Because he's really their older brother, but in many ways they're his older siblings.
Right, yeah, thanks for asking that great question. You know, there is kind of that weird space when you become your older sister's older sister, right? That's kind of natural. And so for siblings who are in that situation, what we hear a lot is that things coming up around maybe guilt is a topic that comes up a lot for those siblings. Guilt over maybe reaching social and developmental milestones that their brothers and sisters may not. And a great example is when you're 16, most of us are thinking about freedom on 4 wheels and learning to drive a car, right? I know I was. But if you have an older sibling who maybe has, a diagnosis that might prevent them from driving, but maybe they love cars, right? Like my brother always loved cars. That can put a little damper on your excitement about learning to drive, right? So some of those issues, I think, around guilt, the idea of, we talk a lot about isolation. Isolation is another sort of common issue that siblings share with parents. It's one way that the sibling experience parallels the parent experience. I'm sure that some of you at least can relate to first receiving the diagnosis and just feeling so alone, and what a difference to be part of this amazing community, right? To have found each other, which is why we encourage siblings to be able to find their people too. But that isolation, I think, can also kind of take on the form of loss, like loss of the idea of a quote-unquote typical or normal sibling relationship, right? Siblings can kind of mourn that loss of like the normal sibling relationship. And then on the flip side of that, we hear, but my sibling is my biggest fan. We have this amazing bond that my friends don't get to experience with their brothers and sisters. So I always like to emphasize the positives as well as the challenges. Another question from the virtual?
Last question.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. This question is from Katie Noble virtually, and it's a really good one. How do you explain to the typical sibling that the special sibling is different? And she had said her 6-year-old doesn't understand that his SAS brother is any different. Most people don't understand his sibling speech, but her 6-year-old understands everything, so he doesn't even recognize that he has a speech disorder. So how do you properly, I guess, explain to your child what's going on?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And it helps me emphasize the fact that when you're sharing information with a sibling, you really have to think about age-appropriate language, right? So if you're talking about a 6-year-old, if you're talking with a 6-year-old, what words can you use to help them understand? And one of the most powerful ways to kind of have that conversation is to invite that child, the sibling, to ask questions about their sibling, right? Like, well, what things are confusing to you about your brother or sister, right? What questions do you have? And then the other kind of part of that, because sometimes I think we assume that we know what the sibling is thinking, right, based on what we would be wondering or whatever, and it's sometimes surprising for parents to know that their little 6-year-old brains are kind of thinking about things in totally different ways. So to sort of invite the child to ask questions to find out what's important for them to know, but then also to, first of all, be honest. Honesty is really important. And sometimes the honest answer is, I don't know, and we have to be really courageous in saying that. I don't know, but I'm trying to find out. And then also try to, as much as possible, present the challenges that the diagnosis presents as a spectrum of ability. There are things that we're good at and that we're not so good at for all of us, right? So, brother has this diagnosis. What does it mean about what he can and cannot do? Because young children especially observe things through routine and behavior, right? And so it's important to kind of relate to how they're seeing the world. I hope that answered the question. Yeah.
We're going to sneak in one more.
One more. All right, I love it. A sibling question. I love it.
How do I get the attention of an adult without seeming like a jerk? Like, my mom, I admire this, but also find it a bit annoying, but like she'll get so headstrong, like her way is the way. And like, I'll maybe have an idea, but like, I don't know how to say the idea without like, hey, listen to me. Like, I don't know how to, just get the attention without, be sounding like a jerk and stuff.
Right. That's such a good question. And so sometimes I think writing can be a really helpful thing. I don't know if so one thing that I did with my parents is I kept a little journal and we would just pass it back and forth, and I could ask those like questions or say those things that are kind of hard to say sometimes, and like leave it on their pillow, and then they would read it and respond to me. So that's like not as confrontational, but you can get out your feelings and they can have time to read it and sort of process it. That might be a really good way. And then also, if you are a family that prefers to talk, I don't know do you guys like talk or, maybe just the way you approach it and say like, can we talk about something that's kind of hard for me to talk about?
Yeah.
And I don't want to sound like a jerk and I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I feel like really strongly about this thing.
Yeah.
Like you know what I mean? So you're kind of like setting the stage rather than just blurting it out. And that can give parents time to be like, okay, let's prepare for this. Like this is what we're going to do. And, I think the fact that you're here even asking that question tells me that your parents are really good about wanting to support you. So
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, thank you so much for asking that. That was brave. All right, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Holl. Okay, we're gonna take a short break, and we're gonna come back here in this room and review the ABCs of guardian advocacy and special needs. In the breakout room, we'll be having roundtable discussions. So that's due up at 11 o'clock.